Hey, this is Rob. This is episode 79 of the Folly Coffee Podcast. Let's get it brewing. All right. I'm here with Luke Derheim, creative visionary of Craft and Crew. So, Luke, list all the restaurants of Craft and Crew because I will always forget one, and I always feel really bad about it.
Yeah, we have five different restaurants right now that we're open right now. We have Stanley's in Northeast Minneapolis. We have the Howe Daily Kitchen and Bar in South Minneapolis, Pub 819 in downtown Hopkins. We have the Block in St. Louis Park, and we actually run a bar also in Hastings, in downtown Hastings. And we're actually opening a new one in Minnetonka, so that one's going to be called Duke's on 7. That just went under construction last week.
I don't know if there was any restaurant group that did more during COVID than Craft and Crew. And that's a big part of why I wanted to bring you in today, because I'm just absolutely amazed that every time you turn, there's a new something happening with Craft and Crew. And but we had met pre-pandemic just about cold brew, because you serve Peace Coffee as made by Phil Terra.
You got it.
And that's where we first met. And when we first met, it was like half the conversation was about the cold brew and getting set up as a vendor, and then the other half just like ended up spiraling about like, wait, what book do you? I remember we were eating at Hope because you came down to the brewery, tasted some cold brew, and we went up at Hope. It ended up being like an hour and a half long breakfast about like, oh, have you read this book? No. Have you read this book? And you introduced me to I can't remember the title, but the Miracle Morning. Yeah. And I didn't necessarily agree with everything in that book, but there's a lot about it that I took away. And the idea is like waking up at 5 a.m. And I've literally said this on a recent episode, that it's like those 4 hours before anyone expects you to respond to anything, and you can get this morning routine done. It really does change how you can do business. And so I was just like, that's the biggest thing I remember from our first meeting, is it like rapidly expanded into discussion of all different areas of it. So I definitely wanted to have you on today.
Yeah.
We'll talk COVID stuff, but I'm sure everybody's burnt out on hearing how everybody's pivoted, but it's been really cool what you've done there. But so before you were creative visionary at Craft and Crew, I just want to go all the way back to your history of how you got started in food and beverage. Was it always the restaurant game? How did you end up being a part of Craft and Crew in the first place?
Yeah, it's a really funny story, actually. So back out of college, I went to college at University of North Dakota, and back when I graduated there, it was 2009, so it was right at the height of the recession. And there wasn't a lot of stuff going on for a recent grad. So what did I do? I bartended in college, really enjoyed the industry, and I was just looking for something to do as I came back down to the Twin Cities. And I looked online on, of all places, Craigslist. And if you can believe it, how I got connected with Dave and Steve at Craft and Crew is through Craigslist. So I actually applied for a marketing internship with them way back when, and now we're business partners. And from back 11 years ago, actually now 12 years ago was when it all started.
And looking back on that, like, what was Craft and Crew at the time? Because I'm sure at the time it was very different than the group of restaurants it is now.
So back when I joined, it was we had one restaurant and we had one bar, actually two bars. So back in the day, it was the Rail Station Bar. It was now what's called the Howe. And also in Hopkins, we had Hopkins Tavern, and now which was now Pub 819. And so back when I started, David and I were thinking about what different things could we do with the brands that we have currently, and what might the future be. So back then, again, it was really only, it was the Rail Station was our only restaurant, and we started throwing things at the wall, and we made a ton of mistakes. And we did a ton of things that maybe now we look back and think that was really stupid.
Yeah. So as you're throwing things at the wall, I kind of want to dive into that kind of phrase, because in restaurants, it does seem so random sometimes what becomes popular, what doesn't. So as you're looking at the existing bars and restaurants you have, what kind of things are you throwing at the wall as you're trying to look forward into the direction that the business is going to go? Yeah,
we really look to lead. There's a lot of different restaurants we feel that like to copy each other and do what their neighbors are doing. But what's really fun with us is to see, maybe throw something completely different at the wall that nobody's doing. And as you and I talked about, the blue ocean strategy, something that's like is so off the wall, but maybe we can work. And one thing that really I think is our brand to a T is our dog menu. That is something that we honed. We've almost served 50,000 dog meals since we launched this about 5 years ago. And it's become such a part of our brand that all of our stores have a dog menu. And it's just a crazy idea that was fostered by one of our managers who came to us, and we're like, we'll greenlight it. And that's what I think is really fun, is that we won't say no to a good idea, or if it's crazier the idea, the better.
Well, it's funny to think about it now that allowing dogs, especially with millennials, is like, you're not going to allow me to bring my fur baby into this building that serves food? How dare you? And so now it's become almost like an expectation, especially with like breweries being really popular and it being really popular there. But if you look back 5-6 years, I don't think that was the expectation that I could bring my animal. No. And so to think of something like that is ahead of the curve of, this is my child, and how dare you not allow me to bring my child into this restaurant?
And not only that, they're going to buy a 3-course meal for their dog. I mean, we can serve them an appetizer, an entree, and we make our own pup cream for dessert. So it's just different. Being an experience is what we look for with the new idea that's going to differentiate. So, like, for example, another fun thing that we threw at the wall, just over 2 months ago, is our ice games. So went to the guys over at Minnesota Ice, talked to them about doing some crazy, fun, different things, and we put beer pong tables and we put beanbag games made out of ice in our parking lots. And within the first week, we had all 4 major TV networks pick up the games, and we sold out basically the whole 5 weekends that we launched. And we didn't really think anything of it, but at the time there was nothing else to do, and there still is with COVID, not much to do. And people are just hungry for something fun and different. And we feel like if we can offer something different, they can have fun, they're going to come in and they're going to remember us. Whereas if you go to another restaurant, maybe you're just going to be there for a quick sandwich or something, but you don't really have that connection. You don't have something fun and different that's going to be that hook to bring you back.
And that's what was so cool about the ice games when I saw it, is visually it was really cool looking, right? You have the pong table that's made out of pure ice. You've got the bag set that's made out of ice. So just to see it, you've got the Instagram side for people that just want to do something and take pictures and have a little fun. But to me, it also was like, okay, outdoor dining is a requirement. Also, you can't do, well, you can now, but at the time it was like, you can't do any enclosures. And so most people go, well, shit, we can't do outdoor dining. And you look at it and go, well, what would be fun to do outside when it's freezing? And that was so cool. And like, ice bars have always been a thing in Minnesota, but that's the first time I've ever seen that. And it's things like that I go, these seem to pop up consistently with Craft and Crew. So I'm curious, as you go back to these 3 locations, what was, in your opinion, the first big move that you made when you at the time are 2 bars and 1 restaurant, and you said that you're starting to throw things at the wall to want to move forward?
Sure. I'd say moving in when we went into Northeast Minneapolis and took over Stashu's building and turned it into Stanley's, it was an institution that people understood to be one thing. And so when we brought in something different, the neighborhood at first was a little apprehensive. And I think that's whenever we do a rebrand or a redesign, like for any property that we go into, we have to have a level of trust. They have to have a level of trust of us to really get to know us. And I think when we started doing crazy things with sampling, and we started launching a food truck pretty much synonymous when we launched Stanley's. And so we started doing things that I think the vast majority of restaurants in Northeast hadn't done. And our level of service and just the craziness of things that we would do. I mean, we'd do, 99-cent Bloody Marys, and it wasn't just things that normally probably from a marketing standpoint you wouldn't do, but just a lot of crazy things to get people in. So looking back at the earlier days, I mean, we were at beer festivals nonstop. I mean, back to Beer Dabbler, we would go serve there just to get our name out. We would just be a part of anything that we could just get our name out, and it really paid dividends. I mean, we even did a beer festival. We did multiple beer and bacon festivals there, where we shut down 4 city blocks and had 5,000 people there with 60 breweries. So, I mean, just a lot of crazy things that would really just drive the brand home and get people acclimated to what we were all about, which is a lot of fun and making that connection.
Yeah, because it is very risky to, especially with restaurants and bars, to be what might be considered ahead of the curve, because if it doesn't work, it's already such a risky business. But on the flip side, it's like if you kind of do what already exists, you're just going to get lost in the mix. That if you open a place that you could think of 10 other places that it's exactly like, why would I ever come back to this one location? And then it just becomes purely about location, like the Block is a perfect example of that. I don't want to skip to that. But so you open Stanley's. Yeah. What's the progression like from there?
Sure. So we, had Stanley's. Things started going well. We did launch the food truck, had some success with that, started doing a ton of events, and then started looking toward the city of Hopkins. We had the Hopkins Tavern at the time. David, a partner, came and said, maybe I think it's time to really revamp this. The neighborhood's changing, especially if you look at downtown Hopkins now from where it was 7 years ago, it's very different. So back when we ended up revamping that, we came up with a concept really honing in on whiskey, which at the time we thought was really going to be the next big spirit to blow up, because at the time craft beer was really the thing, which it still is now, but there really was an emphasis on whiskey or spirits back in the day. When we started looking at the pub. So back in, it would have been 2016, we started working on the pub, and it was a complete transformation. And at the time, Hopkins was just, I would say, one of the only first-ring suburbs still that hadn't seen explosive growth like some of the other ones, like St. Louis Park at the time. And so when we went in there, we had clientele that were, used to just the standard bar. And so it was quite a challenge to think differently with some of the stuff there. But we really saw that long-term, we thought Hopkins was a huge opportunity. And still to this day, after we went ahead with it, we've just been blown away by how awesome the community's been in Hopkins. And we really also thought when we opened up, we're not just going to draw from Hopkins. We're going to draw from Edina, from Eden Prairie, from Minnetonka, from all these other suburbs. So we think, I guess, when we're going into a neighborhood, we're not just thinking of that neighborhood. We're trying to see how far we can, really reach the swath of customers, because we think there was something special there.
And that's where you really have to be doing something that no one's doing, because the more similar it is to anyone else, then why go even 10 minutes away if there's a place kind of like that right down the road, even if maybe the one 10 minutes away is a little better, but not for my convenience. And with Hopkins Tavern, was it in a position that you needed to change? Was it declining? Was it about to close, or was this just a proactive decision to move forward and revamp? Because that can also be a big part of like the perception of why it's changing. Yeah,
I'd say it was more proactive. The business was, it's probably pretty stagnant, to be honest with you. It wasn't growing exponentially any means. And if we were just running the bar, there was really no food other than Heggy's Pizzas and some fried food. So very vastly different than what it is today. So it was a business that wasn't going to exponentially grow with the times. And so we thought it made more sense from an investment standpoint to go ahead, really change the brand. And long term, I think we all thought it's been a good thing to do. And we look back at it after we did what we did in Hopkins, it seemed like a flood of new businesses and a flood of new fun ideas and new people came to town.
It's the whole chicken or the egg thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So, we put in garage doors within a year. There's 2 other garage doors on Main Street. So, we think we were doing something right. And we had a lot of positive feedback from the guests from the town. And it felt good because we knew that the product we wanted to bring there ended up working. So
yeah, because if it isn't a proactive decision, it's funny how intuitive people can be about like changes. If it was struggling and it was kind of known that it's struggling, and then all of a sudden it rebrands, you're going, oh, this is like a desperate, the Hail Mary to try to get this space to work. But when you're like, man, that place was working and they're still changing it, it does put a little more pressure on the situation. But the perception's like, man, they must really be confident in this new thing. If this thing isn't broken, but they're still going to upgrade it, then it must really be excited about this new concept. And I live about 10 minutes away from Pub 819, and I can tell you I've been there a few times, and there's nothing like it within really, unless you go to downtown Minneapolis to find a whiskey selection, which it's not going to be the space that you have there in Hopkins. There's a lot of things about it that are just way different than what anyone else is doing.
Yeah. And also, it's really all about the people with us too. We can have the whiskey, we can have the garage, we can have all this stuff inside, but really I think not only these fun experiences that we can bring from what we have inside the building, but it's really the people that we feel is really make or break for the whole concept. You know, throughout the last year, especially through COVID, and we can talk about that more later, but it's just our people are just everything to us, and they can make or break when you come in and have a whiskey or a burger. It's really everything to us.
And was it the same idea behind the Howe? Because it was previously, what was it called?
It was called the Rail Station.
So previously Rail Station, similar idea, as you said, this isn't broken, but there's a major opportunity here to upgrade our space. And that's a funny thing too, because a lot of people might say, well, let's go open a new space. You know, if we have a new concept, let's go open a new space. But then you're risking, does this location work? And with an existing space, you know the traffic, you know the people that are in the area, you know the area well. And so in a weird way, even though it still is a big risk to change a concept, it takes some of the variables out. And but it's still like, it's so crazy to think that's like, that's working, but it could work better.
Exactly. And I'd say for the house specifically, that was probably the hardest transformation we ever did. It was, if you knew the Rail Station, it was a place that was almost like a Cheers bar. It was a great neighborhood bar, and it was, everybody knew everybody, and it was a great group of people. It was something that we saw, though, coming up on the horizon. The neighborhood was really changing. And so what was good at the time, we thought, you know, long-term was probably not the right decision for the restaurant. So that was something that probably the first year was it was very difficult, because we had a lot of people that probably didn't want it to change. And it was probably one of the tougher transitions we ever did. But at the end of the day, and now to this day, we still are happy we did it. But it was a huge learning experience of having something that somebody loves so much and you taking it away from them. It was an interesting example.
That's the huge pro and con of a great neighborhood bar. If it's your neighborhood bar, it's the best thing in the world. You know everybody, but I think everybody's had this experience, and maybe it's a new neighborhood or a new city, or you're just visiting and you accidentally walk into the place that's the neighborhood bar, and you just immediately feel so uncomfortable. And so as a neighborhood changes, anybody new that moves into the area goes to the neighborhood bar and is like, oh, I shouldn't be here. Everybody here knows, and that's a weird thing to think about. And that is what's really cool about the Craft and Crew restaurants is sometimes people are like, oh, where's your cold bread? And I'll be like, and then all the Craft and Crew restaurants are like, what's that? And you list them off, and they go, that's the same group? And that's the cool thing about it is each concept is so radically different, and yet there's kind of like central core themes behind each of them that ties them together, that once you think about it, you go, oh, I could see how they're all the same group, but each one is just its entirely new concept, which is, again, ahead of the trends, especially in Minnesota, that I think a lot of people want to open a restaurant, then we're going to open our second location here, and then our third location here. And then each subsequent location you open is going to be less of a fit, because in theory, you're going to choose the best location for that, versus what you're doing is, like, if you have a concept, you can find an entirely new area that it wouldn't work with something you already have. And that's what I felt about the block, because I obviously feel very strongly about St. Louis Park because I live there. And you've got this weird thing when I moved there. You go, well, where do you want to meet up? And they're like, Bunny's or Park Tavern. I'm like, oh yeah, wait, those are the only two options.
The only two bars.
Then they're both awesome, right? Like, they're both great neighborhood bars and like great spots, awesome people there. But you go, wait, how is that? You got the West End, obviously, but I don't really consider that St. Louis Park. That's its own weird thing over there. And like the specific vibe for those bars over there, that's not my thing. And I go, this is so weird that there's such a big population of people. It's a growing area. There's a ton of young families. There's a ton of, like, kind of first home purchases. I'm going, wait, why isn't there something here? That just always blew my mind. And then the block opened, and I was like, I don't even know what the concept is. It's going to work, because now St. Louis Park has a third bar. And that spot when you open it. So I'd love to hear that process, because it's not necessarily easy to find. You know, it's kind of, you do the roundabout thing, then you're going, and there's construction right now, which doesn't help, but it's not necessarily the easiest to find. So I'm very curious how you ended up choosing the location, how you dial in what the concept is going to be, and what that entire process is like from scratch.
Sure. Yeah, that was probably, it was the longest process and the most interesting one. I'd say we started So it would have been probably back in 2018, probably in August of 2018. My partner David drove by, saw a for sale sign on it, and we were looking at properties at the time. We're looking for different places. We actually really wanted to open up another restaurant in Hopkins, and we actually ended up looking at the one right on Excelsior Boulevard. It didn't end up working, but we really liked Hopkins. We liked the area out west, and David ended up seeing this, and it was a vacuum store. So the place was called Park Vacuum, and so we called and talked to the guy, and we thought the visibility is really good, and that's something we always look for. Is three things: visibility, if it's in a neighborhood, and is there a good mix of neighborhood people that can walk and be support the restaurant. And we go in there, and first we walk around. We see the parking's kind of small. We start looking around, and we're like, this is crazy, but we think it could work, and we could literally see this place somehow growing, and we could expand the building this way and that way, and maybe it'd work. Try to put an offer in on the building, and we got outbid. So they came back to us 6 months later, said, guess what? Deal fell through. Are you interested? So we ended up going through almost a year of environmental work, and really we're like, this place is going to, we know that, like your point, there's only 2 bars in St. Louis Park. We think this is a good opportunity. We ended up having it was almost a 2-year process to get it from start to scratch, from start to finish, to get it going. And, along the whole time we were opening this place, we had a lot of people saying, you guys are crazy for going off a area where you have to have like 2 roundabouts to get to it. It's not easy to get to. We don't think it's a good location. I mean, even I remember back to our food rep saying, are you sure, maybe this is a good location for you guys? And so, I guess the way we think about it too is if people are telling us maybe we're crazy or maybe we're onto something. So we ended up opening, and it quickly became our number 1 store. Just based on that there was such a need in St. Louis Park. There was such a need for something fun and different, offering a different menu. We did these surveys and focus groups before we opened up, and we saw so many people saying, we love Park Tavern, we love Bunny's, but we're kind of looking for something different in our repertoire too that we can only find in Minneapolis. And so that's what we really listened to the neighborhood, and it was kind of off to the races after that.
And the first time I knew it was opening, because I was familiar with Craft and Crew and live in St. Louis Park, then the first time I knew where it was the sign is right off the highway. Yeah. And so you go, yeah, technically this location's a little tough to get to, but there's thousands of people passing every single day with that sign laying right over the highway. So in a weird way, you don't have a ton of traffic of people driving by it at all. No. But you have a ton of people seeing that sign every day. And then you've got the billboard up now. And I was like, okay, you got the billboard game going right by where it is. And my first experience at the block, I walked in and saw the menu. I was like, this is like every... and I mean this in a great way. I was like, this is like every new trend on one menu. Yeah. And it was because you got your Nashville fried chicken, and I was like, love that. And then you've got like healthy bowls. And I go, I could invite anyone here. Yeah. I could invite absolutely anyone here, and someone will be able to find something. And, some people will be like, well, if you're trying to do everything, and you're like, but do you know how hard it is to find, especially with a younger group of people, to have a menu with the drink menu, the food menu. I've got a dog. Yep. You've got every part of it that you go, at the very least, I could invite anyone to this. And it's like such a fail-safe place to suggest to meet up.
And, we hear that so often. And that's really what we strive for. We want to have anybody that walks in that door feel like they can order something. And so one of the big things about the block when we opened it up was, and the feedback we got from the neighborhood was, there's no vegan options. There's no vegetarian options. But we also, we still want to have a burger. We still want to have whatever else that you guys have to offer. And there was just not a healthy mix of that kind of food offerings. And so we're like, well, this is a no-brainer. Why would we not offer both of them? We already know how to do this. And why not offer a little bit more? So it was something that really took off when people realized they could come in with anybody and they'd be happy whether they came in for breakfast on the weekends or for dinner. So like you said, especially with your dog, why not?
Yeah. And so when it opened, I was like, that conundrum to me since I've moved in, because I think I was there for about a year before the block opened. I'm like, this is so crazy. There's 2 bars in this entire area. Like, I've always lived in an area where there's just always new bars, or there's always places to go to. I'm like, just like, there's 2 bars in St. Louis Park outside of the West End. And it doesn't surprise me that it picked up quickly, because not even to mention that the menu, that everything's great. Like, the food is awesome. Like, and so I'm curious on the food side with not just the block, but all your restaurants. And then I kind of want to move on to this COVID era, because what you've been doing is so cool, which is, those are 2 sentences that aren't normally next to each other. But with your food programs, who are you bringing in on the culinary side to be able to do such a diverse range of offerings across all your different restaurants? Because the downside of having that way of doing business, of having each concept be different, is now you've got different menus at every single place, different recipes, different ingredient needs, different suppliers. How do you manage that, the culinary program at all the different restaurants?
Yeah, good question. It's an ongoing battle, to be honest with you. It's something that our team over the years has done a great job of. When we throw ideas at the wall, a lot of times they figure out a way to execute it. And I'll give you an example of, just back to like even the roasted chicken or the Nashville hot, doing that initially, we brought our culinary team to a couple different restaurants in town, and we said, we don't want this, we want something like this, but better. And so within, brought them out within a week, they had a great solution, and that's what we ended up launching at the Howe, and then what we brought to the block. So there's a lot of things that we do at one store that will translate to other locations, but there's a lot of things, like you said, probably about 30% of our menu at each store is different at the minimum, if not like 50%, depending on the location. So we really predicate ourselves on trying to change the menu twice a year, to always look for new, fresh ideas, whether it's a poke bowl. 3 years ago, I'm in California looking at these, and I'm like, poke is just blowing up here. Why don't we give it a try? And sure enough, it took off at our restaurants. Or whatever's popular at the time, we just give our chefs the latitude to try to come up with it. And we have a really good food supplier and a really good relationship there that really helps us kind of execute whatever we're looking for at the time.
And so a lot of it's location by location, that there's different chefs at each location that have some autonomy, that say, hey, this is your space, as opposed to like, hey, you have to do it the craft and crew style. That's not necessarily a thing, because everything's so different.
It is. I'd say about 50 to 60% of our menu between all of our brands are the same. Yeah. So, and that's something when we find a dish that is such a home run, we will absolutely push it to the other stores. Like one of our initial menus at the pub, and still on all of our menus today, is a brisket grilled cheese. We do a smoked brisket in-house, and it sells like crazy, and everybody loves it. So we have it on all of our menus. It's just, if there's something that really, really, really works, we know, and we'll test it at other locations. And generally, somebody that likes it at Stanley's is going to like it at the block, for example.
Was it ever a discussion that should we or shouldn't we do this, at the risk of the different unique locations starting to become a little bit similar?
Yes, we've had those conversations, but I think generally each location has its own flair. And I think that generally, though, if we have some really good winners, most people will like it. And obviously our customers are the ones that are going to tell if we're right or not. A lot of the things that we come up with, it doesn't really matter if we like it. It's matter if the customers like it. So if it's not selling, we're going to take it off the menu. And I think that's something that's really important to know. And what we really pride ourselves on is listening to our customers. If our customers are telling us and wanting this item, or they want to come out for the ice games, for example, like, we're going to do whatever it takes to please our customers. So I think we always kind of divert back to that question: is this what they want? Is it selling? If they don't want it, what can we offer them on this menu in this neighborhood that they're going to want? So, for example, like at the Howe in South Minneapolis, we sell more vegan dishes than anywhere else. And so typically we'll go down that path, and our chef there really likes to play in that sandbox, whereas, in Northeast, it's a little bit heartier food. It's a little bit heavier bar food. And so it kind of depends on the neighborhood too, but then there is some things that translate to all of our brands.
And just listening to sales numbers is such an important thing, because sometimes customer service is like the loudest people are not necessarily representing your entire customer base. So even if someone did complain about that, it's like, hey, now I thought this was just a Stanley's thing. You go, well, you might care about this, but the numbers don't lie. Like people are eating it here. So why would we overthink, should we duplicate this at the other restaurants if it works? Like if it's good, it's good. And if it sells, then it sells.
Exactly. We can't just keep a dish on for one person, unfortunately, which
you'd be surprised that logic is back to my Sam Adams days. I cannot tell you how many times you go into a bar and you're trying to get on tap and you go, okay, so which ones are moving for you? Which ones aren't? And they're like, this one doesn't move at all. And you're like, oh, so would you consider changing it? Oh no, these two guys come in every week and they love this beer. They'd be so upset if I was like, so you're going to keep something that doesn't sell because you've got two guys. And I was like, what if you did it in bottle? They prefer draft. You go, do you think you'd lose those customers if you put? Yeah. So it's funny that sometimes just the most vocal people end up making the decisions for you when really it's like the numbers don't lie about that kind of stuff.
So true. And we have to listen to them. I mean, it just, to the numbers, you have to follow them, and your customers are going to tell you what makes sense and what doesn't.
So as we go into 2020, you've got 5 locations.
Yeah.
And the announcement's made, hey, we're shut down for 2 weeks. What is the instant reaction to everything that's going on?
Yeah, it was, it had been 5 months after we opened the block. And, at first when we heard the reaction, we just didn't know, everybody was thinking, how long is this going to go on? What is, maybe this is going to be a short thing. We immediately took 1 day off. I'll never forget it. It was St. Patty's Day. And, we had just bought a keg of green beer. And so we're sitting in the block with a keg of green beer. And so we ended up pouring a green beer and having a beer that day and thinking, like, we're going to take 1 day off and then we're going to hit the ground running. And we are not going to let the exterior circumstances dictate how this is going to go. And from that point on, that was our mentality. And whatever we needed to do to stay in business, stay relevant, stay fun, we did. And I think our whole team looked for the leadership from us to say, we're not going to stop. We're going to keep going. We're going to throw stuff at the wall. It might be crazy. Some things might not work. Some might. And that was really, from the get-go, our mentality, where I think still to this day, if you ask our team how we did throughout the pandemic, it was all based on the mentality that we're going to figure it out and we're going to have fun, as much fun as you legally can have with under the horrible circumstances.
Well, I think this is why we get along, because that was my instant reaction. Is you go, okay, so everything's closed, so all the cafes and restaurants that serve our coffee are now not serving our coffee. And you go, okay, well, at the time, so 70% of the business disappears overnight. It's like, and it was weird because my instant reaction was like, okay, but what opportunities or what good comes out of this? Because people are still going to be drinking coffee. And then also I just had this gut feeling that most people are just going to say 2 week lockdown. Okay, we don't have to be around for 2 weeks and then we'll just come back. And I go, so this is a weird opportunity when things suck to try to create something positive and do something cool, when I was like, most people are not going to be thinking in that way. And so hopefully just by providing something that's a positive during a time where everything sucked, people are going to be attracted to what you're doing. And so it's almost this unique opportunity to attract new customers from farther away than ever before, because you're the only ones thinking in that way. So as you start to have that mentality that, hey, we're going to have some green beers, and I'm sure a lot of industry folks, green beer will bring a sick feeling to their stomach for years to come.
You don't want it.
But as you have that green beer and you're sitting there and taking this 1 day off, what's the mindset and what are the ideas coming to the table as you approach the lockdown?
Yeah. Well, first off, we luckily had been doing online ordering for now about 5 years prior to COVID. So we were kind of set up from an operations standpoint to be able to execute the new model overnight, which was our only model at the time, which is going to be to-go food. So we knew that we did have a leg up right away, and our marketing team is something that is really special to us. And they really, when we have ideas or we push something out, they can really garner some fun at different just excitement online by whatever they do. So right away we started pushing out different food specials, different items that were unique for the pandemic. And we just started thinking differently. And so what I mean by that is that, within the first 2 months, I remember it was probably about 3 weeks into the shutdown. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, takeout business is going decent. And we have luckily things were okay at the time, but we were having problems with our brunch. And brunch used to be a huge thing for us. Mm. And I was like, we need to do something completely different that nobody's doing. And maybe we can garner some of our brunch business back. And so one thing that we threw at the wall was creating a whole new concept called Biscuits Breakfast Bar. And to your credit, you came in with some really good cold brew, and we got to make this whole new fun concept called Biscuits Breakfast Bar. And the first weekend we launched it, we didn't really know what we were going to do. We didn't know anything if it was going to be successful. And, I remember vividly one of the chefs at Stanley's goes, "I'll be happy if we sell 20 biscuits today." That first weekend, almost every single store sold out of biscuits, and we had to literally stop the online orders. It was so crazy.
I remember that because I got in on that first weekend of ordering. And to your credit, it sounds like, because the way you just laid it out made it sound like, oh, let's do this thing. Hopefully people show up. But so much hard work went in ahead of it.
Yeah.
Building an entirely new Instagram page just for biscuits, getting the press releases out there, having the influencers come through and try it.
What the influencers do.
Yeah, the weekend before you officially announced, because that was the first time I was able to try it. I was like, I'm definitely not an influencer, but I got the invite because we're supplying the coffee. And so I came and tried it, and everything was delicious. And, I was showing up and go, oh, this is literally every influencer, because guess what? They have nothing to do.
They had nothing to do.
There's nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. And I'm like, this is brilliant. And it made me think really differently, because we eventually opened the tasting room.
Yeah.
And part of the discussion was like, do we want to do this? And I thought back to that moment. I go, no one's doing anything.
Nobody's doing it. You have to do something.
And so to get the attention of the media, of the influencer during a time when there's no positive stories out there, all that work front loaded onto an entirely new concept, utilizing the spaces you already had, was so smart, because it was that time where everybody's going, get takeout because things are hard. And then you've almost got this weird sense of like, I'm buying this and I feel bad for the person. I feel pity while I'm trying to get some delicious brunch. And like, it's like this weird combination of feelings versus like, whoa, entirely new cool thing. I'm all in.
Yeah.
And so I'm shocked how fast things sold out. I wasn't surprised it worked, but what was that feeling like when you sold out? Because that brings its own set of troubles, that in your launch weekend, now you've got people that are like, what the hell? I wanted to try your new thing.
Yeah. It was a whole set of new problems. Like you said, to the time you came from the influencer event, it was 8 days from the concept. When I thought about it, told the team, when we actually launched it. It was 8 days. And that was the first day we actually launched it. We realized that right after it went out, we're like, oh my God, we need to really pivot here, because we're getting our ass handed to us here. We need to figure out how to execute this better. So we had to completely change overnight. And by that next day, the Sunday, we had to flip a switch, and we worked all day Saturday to make it work, and we had a whole new set of problems of how busy it was, which was a great problem to have, as you said. But
I'm sure no one listening in the industry is like, oh my gosh, that must have been so hard during COVID for you.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it was fun, and it was different, and there was just nothing positive at the time. There was nobody doing anything, not many people doing something fun and different. And I think that's the first time we realized, especially during COVID, that people were so hungry for something different, because everybody was locked up in their house, and everything was so doom and gloom. And so we really wanted to think about, what could we do that's different? And that led us to a lot of other things that we did after that. But that was like the catalyst from the start of this. We're not going to turn back. We're going to keep doing things different. We're going to keep being who we are, which is really creative and fun. And that really set us up for the rest of the pandemic and to today.
Because you did that, and then Cookies and Custard.
Yeah, we did Cookies and Custard as well.
Which, like, takeout window, genius. It's hot out, and every time I went there to grab food on the patio, there's always a line for that out the door, and I'm going, just constantly pushing new things during a time where, you know, even I think a lot of people, they go, hey, this Biscuits thing is working. Let's ride this out until the end of whatever this is. But you can use that momentum and say, well, if this is working, can we do something else that's different? And then capture that customer. And Cookies and Custard is such a smart way to do that, because now we're capturing the same customer with an additional purchase of, hey, have you thought about dessert yet?
Yeah.
And then, hey, maybe you don't get it today, but the next time you're in the mood for ice cream, there's a new place in town. And I'm just going, every time I turn around, you've got a new thing going. I'm like, how the hell are they managing their time? And so that is a question I want to ask you right now is, with 5 different restaurants, all completely different concepts, different customer bases, these brand new concepts you're pushing through COVID. How do you manage your time as you approach each day?
You know, we luckily use what's called EOS traction. I think we might have talked about this too. So we have a team that really runs on this, what's called EOS traction. This is the way we run our business. And so we really focus on
EOS standing for Entrepreneur Operating System for anyone.
Absolutely. So that's something that really always keeps us focused on what's the most important thing. And so as we plan our days, it's generally around what is going to move the needle, what is going to actually make a difference in our business. And that's kind of where we spend our time and energy on, as opposed to letting kind of, you know, whatever's burning and on fire at the time. And so we have the ability then to think about future things that can really hopefully build the business. So I'd say, you know, generally, as we talked about with Miracle Morning, I try to wake up every single morning at 5 o'clock. I have 2 kids, and if I'm not up by 5 o'clock, I'm pretty much screwed to start my day. So generally, that's the time of day thinking about what is going on in the business, what can we do something different, and a lot of creativity really comes out from 5 to 7 in the morning, I'd say.
Because there's no possible fire drills that could happen at that time.
Generally not.
Hopefully not.
Not always, but yeah. So that's like kind of the time I always think to spend by myself, thinking about what can we really do differently, and what are we not doing today that maybe we should think about doing. And generally the best ideas, at least for me, come in the morning. So that's a huge part of my day. And, you know, especially then going into that, to work with our teams and kind of take ideas, give them to the team and see where they can go with it. We just have such a great team of people that when we come up with something, they not only think it's a fun idea, but will take it and make it better and actually do something how they can execute it. Because a lot of times there's a great idea, but if you can't execute it, it's pretty much worthless. And
one of my big takeaways from EOS and Traction is everybody knows exactly what their role is and they know what they're responsible for. And so I could see how during a COVID time, if you don't have really rigid, concrete roles and responsibilities in place as things go crazy, it's everybody. I think it's almost human nature to be like, well, this isn't my fault. This person's got to do it. Whereas with that EOS system in place, it's like, no, this is your role. It's not my role. So sorry to say it, but you're dealing with this. And then another time something will come up that's my role and I have to deal with it. Yeah. And so it almost is like a way to take on things before they come up, because we know exactly who's responsible for what. And I've said that multiple times on here, that it's just me and Jeff at Folly, me and Brandon at Filterra. Yeah. But we know exactly what each person's responsible for. Yeah. And those lines don't get blurred. And then when something like COVID and it puts everything under a pressure cooker, it's a way to combat that every person knows exactly, if something goes wrong, exactly who the person is that has to take care of that.
Absolutely. It's been the best, one of the best things we ever did as a company. And I think, you know, looking back, I think we've been on EOS for 5 years, and honestly, I don't know how we'd run our business if it wasn't with that, because it just, to this day, it really guides us from what is important and what is our long-term vision and what we want to accomplish. And you know, just looking back before the pandemic, we said we wanted to open up another restaurant in 2021. And we continued on the path. I mean, that was what was a part of what we talked about, and we kept looking.
That was the final. That was the final straw for me. When I saw that announcement in the paper that you're opening, I was like, "Come on! Like, what? How? Like, what is it? How are they managing? How is this possible that they are launching 2, 3, 4 different concepts during COVID, with success, by the way. Oh, and by the way, we've been working on a new concept. We just acquired a building, and this will be opening in 21.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is ridiculous. And so it's interesting to hear that that's kind of what it allows you to do that. That's often the really hard thing in business is how do you come up with big, long-term vision and the bigger picture while still taking care of the details. In 2020, by the way, the details are everything is crazy and nothing is normal. How has that process been of opening, is it Duke's?
Duke's on 7, yeah.
Duke's on 7, the old Christos space in Minnetonka. How has that process been?
Sure.
Versus something like the Block. So the Block is a scratch built out from a vacuum store. So thankfully this Christos was a restaurant, so you at least have a food space. But how has this process been with everything going on that you now have a brand new concept you're opening?
Yeah. The Christos space is a very interesting one. We actually, even though it was a restaurant, we gutted the entire place. So there's really no infrastructure left of what was a restaurant. So it's
might as well have been a vacuum store.
It might as well have been a vacuum store. So we brought it down to the studs. As of today, it's completely gutted. And next week they're really starting to build up the frame and go on from there. But it was another opportunity we saw that there's a neighborhood in Minnetonka that's somewhat similar to St. Louis Park in a sense where there's not necessarily a lot of places like ours in a niche, and there's nobody playing really in our sandbox, as we like to say, in that neighborhood. And so we look out there, the visibility is amazing. We have a lot of different people in the neighborhoods that would be able to probably patronize the brand. And we just feel like there's a lot of opportunities out there. And so when it came about to look at that building, we approached the owner actually, and he wasn't at the time actually wasn't even listed on the market. So back in the summer, we went to him and said, "Would you ever be considering selling?" Had our real estate agent go out and talk to him, and lo and behold, it sounded like he was. So it started back in July, and we just ended up closing on the building last week. So it was kind of a long process to not as long as the Block, but it was something that we really think that Minnetonka will be a great neighborhood, and especially with our brand, that it's just another potential community that's underserved.
And so where did you get the name?
Yeah.
What's the concept? Because these are the things I'm interested in. That how did you determine the location? These are all things that Craft and Crew seems to be really, really good at. But I'm really interested in the inception. Like,
sure.
So what's the first step? Do you have a concept and then you go, we need to find a location, or is it we've found a location, now we need to think of something that will work here?
So for this one, it was something that the property came about because we found out that it was available and he would want to sell it. And we had talked about potentially duplicating one of our other brands, and we were thinking about maybe even duplicating the Block for our next restaurant, depending upon where it was. And being that this property is only 6 minutes away from the Block, we were like, there's no way we can physically put another Block 6 minutes away. It's just not going to work. So it then became, we're going to completely do a new concept. We're going to do something very different. It's going to be a huge patio. So, I mean, we just knew it was going to have to be something very different. And so we then started thinking about the name. And David, my business partner, and I, his name's David, I'm Luke. And so a lot of people internally call us Duke. And typically him and I have some crazy ideas, and people generally just call us Duke. And so that's kind of where the name came about. And Steve Steve Benowitz is the owner, and he's the S in Dukes. So it's that's kind of where the name came about. So the menu for this place is going to be probably about 60% of what we do at the Block and our other locations. But this store is going to be a little bit different in how we structure the menu. We're going to have a grill in the kitchen where we typically don't. So we're going to be doing some steaks. We're going to be doing some seafood that we don't typically do at our other locations, and some higher end entrees based on the neighborhood. And again, we just started to do some market research and seeing if that's actually our thesis is right, and that's what the neighborhood wants. And we just pushed out literally this week a survey to trying to get as many people in Minnetonka to give us feedback. And we're giving everybody that takes a survey a free beer when we open up too. So
I've taken a few surveys from places.
And to that point, like throughout the whole pandemic, we kept sending surveys out, and we're like, how do you feel? This is during the first shutdown. How do you feel like when we actually are able to reopen? How are you going to be able to, will you come in the restaurant? Will you order from us? Will you do takeout? Would you only, and so like the surveys to us are, again, going back to the customers, listening to them is just so critical. And so that's why, like right now, when we're starting this process of what the menu is going to be for Duke's, we have an idea, but again, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what we think. It matters what the customer thinks.
And that's such a good point, because especially during all of this, I think a lot of assumptions are made about how people feel.
Yeah.
Well, we just assume no one would show up, or we just assume that everyone feels a certain way based on what we're hearing. But again, sometimes the most vocal people do not represent the majority.
No.
And so with something like that, this had become so political, and all these emotions, and everybody's pent up and angry, and there's so much emotion going on during all this. You start to make assumptions. Well, we can't even considering open because nobody thinks there's a safe way to do it. You go, well, what if we looked at the data and it shows that we're doing it in a very safe way?
Yeah.
Would you be safe? Would you feel good coming back into a space if we're doing these guidelines?
Yeah.
And that's such an important thing, as opposed to just assuming who your customer is, or just talking to your regulars and going, okay, these represent all of our customers. These two guys having these beers every week, that represents why we have this beer on tap.
Yeah.
You have to find out what the big picture is. How do we get people that normally would never leave a review, that would never give feedback? You go, well, what about a free beer? You go,
exactly.
That's a pretty good deal.
Maybe I'll do it. Yeah.
And it's funny because I'm kind of rambling on this point, but it's so important because this is actually something we're starting to do. Not like literally just had the conversation last week that I want to start doing surveys to figure out like how is our coffee consumed at home. But a free beer, in theory, you go, well, shoot, that's a $5, $6, $7, $8 spend potentially if you're looking at it from the revenue standpoint that we're giving away for free. Well, okay. Well, technically that's not our costs. So it's really just our costs we're giving away. So now we're talking about not even half that, whatever your beer margins are. And then you're going, what situation would we not spend $3 to learn a regular customer's feelings about what we're doing as a business? And by the way, they have to come in to redeem this free beer. And what person's going to come into the block, have one beer and be like, thank you, see ya.
Yeah. It just... Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. It's like we'd almost be in a worse position not to do that, because to give that money away, you're just, and if you think about traditional advertising, we don't do a ton of traditional advertising than the billboard you referred to, but typically we like to figure out in our customers and listen to them and not only listen to them, but reward them with our loyalty program and other things that we do. It's hard to go to a Craft and Crew restaurant and not walk out with a loyalty card. I am usually the one to be no, thank you, not interested. And the bartender at the time was like, honestly, dude, you'd be stupid not to get this. He's like, do you think you'll ever come back here someday? I was like, yeah. He's like, you have to have one. That's hilarious. But yeah, no, it's important. So again, it's listening to our customers. And, another thing that was fun thing we did during COVID, and I'd say we're really proud of another story of another idea is healthcare meals. I could talk about is that starting in the pandemic back in April, we had a group that came to us and said, would you deliver meals to a hospital? We're like, absolutely, we'll deliver meals to a hospital. And it ended up sparking a light bulb in us, and we're like, we're going to do this again. And when there was so much negativity and so much unknown and so many scary things going on with COVID, we're like, what better way could we help out than to bring meals to healthcare workers? And we ended up starting it back in April. We delivered back in April probably about 300 meals. And I remember never forget the first time we delivered it. I'm like, we're going to do this. We're going to do 10,000 meals. And within 7 months, we did 10,000 meals, and now we're up to 14,000 delivered meals to healthcare workers on the front lines. And it's like one of the funnest things that we ever did. And we actually, on all of our online ordering menus, we literally have a button that customers can buy the meals, and we deliver them and make them. And it's been like one of the funnest things and most rewarding things we've done during COVID. It's that mindset of it's so easy when things are really hard to start to
like panic or to kind of start to backstep and start to try to like go into survival mode versus like, well, what can we do during this time to increase the positive effect we're having on the community? And that's probably another part of EOS that allows you to have everything compartmentalized by role and responsibility, that allows you to still look at those opportunities and know, can we do it definitively or not?
Yeah. It was very fun. So that was one of the very.
I'm curious, and I'll kind of wrap up on this thought. But knowing how you all operate, already done it twice. We've talked about of taking a concept that exists and revamping it. How do you determine when the time is right? Because that's something I think a lot of people struggle, even if the concept stays the same, but just redoing things. There's like this feeling when you walk into a bar that you're like, I feel like they could use an update. Is that something that you feel like you have a actively ticking clock in your head the second you start a new concept, or is it something that it's the external influences determining that, hey, things are changing around us, now we need to consider a change?
Yeah, I'd say it's a mixture. I think going back to what we talked about earlier about the numbers, I think is something very critical. If the business is not growing year over year, I think that's very scary for what the business model looks like for the future. So for all of our stores, if we don't see growth, we expect growth at every single one of our stores year over year, no matter what. And so that is really one indicator for us, is if we're going the opposite way, or if it's stagnant, something has to change. And so that's something we track every single week by looking at our numbers year over year. Is we have to be trending upwards, or else what is going on? There's probably something wrong, because not only could the business, in our opinion, have to go up just because it's a growing business, but costs go up every single year, from labor to food to drinks that we buy. So it's critically important that the business is continually growing. So I'd say, number one, it has to be growing. And number two, the external factors in the neighborhood might not make you switch the entire concept, but it maybe thinks differently about what you're offering. And so I'll give you an example of, up in Northeast, Stanley's has been there now for over 10 years, and it's pretty well-established business. However, we are thinking about what now can we do that nobody else in that neighborhood is doing that's different. And nobody's doing. And one thing we're going to be doing, we're going to remodel the kitchen there in the next month and a half, and we're going to be putting roasted fried chicken in there, because there's no fried chicken in Northeast Minneapolis. And so it's that kind of thinking that we're like, what else can we do to add to this kick-ass brand of Stanley's that has a following that people love, and we have a great group of people that work there and that people love, but what else can we do to push the envelope? Just because it's working, what else can we do? And, I think that's what it makes the difference between good operators and great operators, is that if it's good, you got to keep pushing yourself to figure out new ways and different things to do, as opposed to being complacent.
Have you read the book Good to Great?
No, but I've heard about it.
That you need to read that one.
Yeah.
So it's a really fantastic book, and it's funny because literally the terms you just used, there's like, it separates good operators from great operators. That's the theme of the entire book. So this book, Good to Great, basically looks at businesses that are good businesses, and they create really strict terms of what good means and what great means. And they look at businesses that over time were a good business, but then just made a huge leap and bound and had exponential growth over time. And the big takeaway is that that's exactly right, is not just saying, hey, we're good, let's rest on our laurels and just continue to do this, but what is it that makes us great? And so the key example is Walgreens. And Walgreens, what they do is their number one thing they're best at is being the most convenient pharmacy. And so they went from being a good business with all their places had delis and a bunch of different stuff. New person takes over. It says, no, our only thing is we're the most convenient pharmacy. They cut away everything that has to do with that. And the most famous example from the book is that they will take down a profitable Walgreens and build a new one. It costs $1 million roughly to build a new Walgreens. And they'll move 2 blocks over if it's more convenient to get to that location.
Believe I see it all the time.
Yeah, and so like that's the mentality of what you're doing, is that you go, yeah, just because things are good, year over year we're stagnant. That's not inherently bad, but that's, especially in the restaurant industry, those are like the signs ahead. It's like, oh yeah, I feel the storm coming in my knees. It's like something like that, where you're like, it's not necessarily bad right now, but I could tell you something's coming, because when you're forward thinking, if you have success, other people are going to look at what you're doing and go, we need to start doing that. Yeah. And then you just will slowly start to lose customers to the other people starting to catch up to what you're doing. Yeah. And so that's something I think about a lot. We're 3 years into it and I'm going, okay, like what else can you do? What else can we do, or what needs to change, or what could we do to make and so that's the online side is what we focus on a lot with that. But that's huge. That's, I think, what Craft and Crew does really well is the additions to menus, curating the menus, having new events that are different. And that's why I was really pumped to have you in today. And Good to Great's a book you absolutely have to read.
It's awesome. I'm definitely going to have to read it.
And I figured what better way to finish an episode, basically how we started it, is that like that's what we bonded over at first. But
I think we had probably the last breakfast before COVID shut down, too.
It was pretty dang close. Yeah. It's crazy to think that was so long ago, because it feels like we kind of just met and we've known each other for like over a year now, which is pretty wild. But I'm excited to see what happens with Duke's. I'm sure if it's like any other your other concepts, that it's going to be very successful. Nice. And congratulations on the success this year. And then
thanks.
I am curious, I know I already said I had my last thought, but I think a lot of people have come up with new ideas during COVID.
Yeah.
I think you're the extreme example, like brand new concepts. What do you do with that when things get back to any form of normal, as we approach the summer, as you know, vaccinations are more widespread and that this thing is under control? What do you do with those things that you have put in place during COVID?
Yeah. We see everything that we did during COVID as a huge asset and all the hard work we did to really catapult us into the future. And what I mean by that is all of the people that we really targeted to take out food from with us, or for Biscuits breakfast bar, or ice games, or our healthcare meals, or anything that people were involved in our brands during the last 11 months of the pandemic. Those people are not going to forget how we made them feel. And that is what our goal is. And if we can be in their mind for a place that they consider for the future, we've won. And I think with the database of people that we've got into our brand over the last 11 months that weren't a part of knew about us before, I think that's how we leverage to grow for the future, because now with our marketing, we're able to push things out and we have a wider reach of all these people. Just like, for example, when you talk about Biscuits Breakfast Bar, had a couple thousand people following on Instagram within a matter of weeks. And so that's a whole new swath of audience that we never had before. And so we see it as a huge opportunity that all of these hard things that we did during the last 11 months is really going to hopefully transition into a lot of growth for us over the next 5 years. And I think a lot of restaurants, unfortunately, didn't pivot, or things didn't happen as they maybe weren't set up for online ordering or weren't ready to kind of pivot. And I think the ones that are going to really benefit long term and really see, once people are getting vaccinated back out, they're going to go to those businesses that were fun and different and creative and coming out with brand new things during the pandemic, I think.
And so it's the combination of effective processes with the EOS traction in place, always trying to be forward thinking while actively listening to your existing and new customers, while also trying to attract new customers with new things you're doing. And that's a pretty lethal combination when you're talking about growth, because it's kind of like, if you can have all of those things in place, it's kind of hard to not do something that your customers are going to like and want to come back to. So really exciting to see that. And I'm like I already kind of said, this is my third final thought. No, I'm kidding. But to see Duke's pop up is going to be really exciting, and
should be fun.
Turn 21 into hopefully a fun year, as opposed to just like riding a shitstorm out of 2020 and into 2021.
Absolutely. And one other thing too, I'll just end on this, is that, we have a culture of having fun and doing different things. And I think this is so telling of where we're at right now, is that when we announced to our team, because we didn't tell our team about Duke's until about, 8 weeks ago, because we were working on, we didn't really know if it was going to go through and whatnot. And when we ended up telling them, they're like, we're not surprised. And I think that is the culture that that is why we've been able to pivot and roll with it, is because we have such great people that are ready and down to do whatever and roll with the punches and have a lot of fun with it.
That's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
I will end this like I end every other episode and say have a nice day.